You would have thought, well, he would inject his personality, and the big deep voice and all that. He didn't do that. He was really kind of very respectful in reading it.
Cash's 1975 autobiography called Man in Black sold 1.3 million copies, and in 1980, Johnny Cash, at the age of 48, became the Country Music Hall of Fame's youngest living inductee. He continued his concert and recording schedule, but times were changing, and although he remained one of country's biggest stars, his popularity was waning.
For a while, Johnny and Patsy Cline and Buck, George Jones and Tammy Wynette and Loretta Lynn and all these people, they were the top, they were the staple of the format. Through the course of the 80s, and by the end of the 80s, they'd been replaced. And it wasn't hip, wasn't cool, wasn't mainstream country music at the time.
The 70s had been a great decade for Cash, but the 80s proved to be another story. Hard living was catching up with him. He was hospitalized several times in the early 80s, and medical problems led to John's abuse of painkillers. He landed back in rehab at the Betty Ford Center in California in 1983, but it was to be his last relapse. In 1985, Johnny joined Carl Perkins, Roy Orbison, and Jerry Lee Lewis for a memorable reunion in Memphis, and the same year he recorded the first Highwaymen album with old friends Willie Nelson, Chris Christopherson, and Waylon Jennings. They would go on to several years of successful concert tours and make 3 more award-winning albums together.
They're coming up to do one song on the Letterman, so they're going to be here in New York. He says, you come over with the litho, and he says, we'll get it signed for you. Well, I go over there, put the litho on the table, so John signs it, and as Chris is signing it, it shows you John's humor. He says, tell you what, son, he says, I see you didn't get Willie to sign it yet. He says, him and I are pretty good friends. I'll put a good word in for you. And then he does like a little, I'll never forget, he did like a little skip, with his feet. He does it like, it was a joke, son.
But in 1986, Johnny's longtime label, Columbia Records, dropped Johnny Cash. Johnny again teamed up with his longtime friend and producer Jack Clement at Polygram Mercury Nashville. But the albums didn't sell well, and it looked like Cash's long career was almost at an end. In the late 80s, Johnny's medical problems began to mount. He was hospitalized numerous times for respiratory and coronary problems, culminating with bypass surgery in 1988. He bravely continued to tour with the Highwaymen, but his health caused him to cancel many dates. With his solo recording career on the decline, a career spanning almost 4 decades appeared to be coming to a close. In 1991, the Grammys presented Johnny with its Living Legend Award, and he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1992. Usually, these ceremonies celebrate a performer's entire career, but Johnny Cash wasn't quite finished. In 1992, Bono, the lead singer of U2, invited Cash to Dublin to sing on the group's album Zooropa, and in 1993, Cash met producer Rick Rubin. Rubin was the founder, along with Russell Simmons, of the hugely successful rap label Def Jam Records. A fan of Cash's, he encouraged him to record some demos on his new label, American Records. They became the album American Recordings, released the following year, and a new generation of fans discovered a new Cash. The album won the Grammy for Best Contemporary Folk Album of the Year in 1995. And Johnny Cash was hot again. He played Johnny Depp's Viper Room in LA. The Highwaymen released their 3rd album and continued their worldwide tour, traveling to the Far East, Australia, New Zealand, and Europe. The following year, in 1996, Cash released his 2nd album for American Records, Unchained, backed by Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, and it won another Grammy, this time for Best Country Album. In 1999, Cash's friends and admirers gathered in New York for an all-star tribute to Johnny Cash.
I went to the tribute that TNT did to him when he appeared that last time, and his health was bad. And it was only then, you know, when you see you're about to lose somebody, that you start to appreciate how big and what a contribution they made. And Johnny Cash is awesome. Well, but you look back at that family. I mean, you got the Carter family, and then you go to June Carter Cash, and then Roseanne and Johnny, and oh my God, it's like it's the whole history of the music. It's all right there.
He went on to release 2 more recordings for American, 2000's Solitary Man and 2002's The Man Comes Around. The Man Comes Around featured a cover of a 9 Inch Nails song, Hurt. Cash's heartbreaking version of this Trent Reznor tune was thought by many in the music industry to be the best song of the year.
When you heard John sing Folsom Prison Blues and I Walk the Line, Ring of Fire, and I think one of the greatest pieces of music I've ever heard was he did in his last days was Hurt. I think that's just one of the most strong, emotionally tugging songs I have ever heard. I think that song and all, you know, his songs they've been around for 40, 50 years, and they're going to be around a lot longer than you or I.
In 2003, Johnny was in and out of the hospital in Nashville, and in May, his beloved wife and singing partner, June Carter Cash, died of complications following heart surgery. Cash declared that anyone who loved June could attend the funeral. Over 1,500 people did. Less than 4 months later, on September 12, Johnny Cash followed her to the grave. His funeral was held at the First Baptist Church in Hendersonville, Tennessee, and he was buried at Hendersonville Memory Gardens alongside June. A tribute concert was held at Ryman Auditorium in Nashville, where Johnny and June first met. People from all walks of life came to the tribute. For one last time, Johnny Cash was the hottest ticket in town. He was remembered by those who attended for his early days as the electrifying performer who first burst onto the rockabilly scene in the 50s. He was remembered as a powerful gospel singer, a country crooner, and pop crossover artist. He was remembered for his humanity and his humor, for his faithfulness to his ideals, and perhaps most of all, for his abiding faith. His was the voice of the common man. He was the Man in Black.
Johnny Cash, he's a funny man. That's how I remember. I remember he kind of got my attention back at Sun one day. He was talking about going next door and having some coffee. He didn't say that. He said, stood up and said, well, I think I got a little too much blood in my coffee system.
A lot of people said, Johnny Cash can't sing. And I said, well, he's a storyteller. And that's what you're doing. And when you're making records, you get 2.5 minutes or 3 minutes, tell a story and convince everybody that it's absolutely true and that you feel it, you know.
Nobody sounds like Johnny Cash at all, probably ever will. Again, not the greatest singing voice in the world, but there was a lot of soul in his music. It came from somewhere way deep down inside, and nobody had that effect on you.
And sincerity. Sincerity was the basic fundamental of what made Cash up. Sincerity. You knew when he said something to you that it was the truth. There was nothing ever phony about John.
I always admired him because he just told the truth about his life. And he was very open about it. I admired him a lot.
He was a one of a kind, and he had a great vision, and he really tried not to compromise his music. You find some people that are just going to do their music and let it stand up and not go with trends. And I think he realized he was what he was, like Popeye. You know, I am what I am, and take me or leave me, you know. So I admired him for that.
You wouldn't believe all the money that man gave away and people he took care of and stuff, you know. You know, he's probably overpaid a lot of people because he wanted to. He was a really good man. I think he got pretty close to being kind of a saint before he died.